Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with a few cards for today's video. This wasn't the video I originally intended to film first for this blog hop, but I kept looking at this Pinecone background from the Simon Says Stamp Cheer Enjoy release, and the wheels just started turning, and I kept asking myself, like, how would this look heat embossed in gold? How would it look in clear, etc.? And I was like, well, I just got to do it and find out. So that's what I did. So I have my MISTI stamping tool here, and I took out the black foam insert so that I could use this stamp because it's a cling rubber on cling foam stamp. And then I have several pieces of cardstock that I've cut down. I have some dark brown cardstock, I have some dark green cardstock, and I have some craft cardstock. So I used my anti-static powder tool and then brushed off the excess with my big surface sweep brush. And then I'm stamping the image with clear embossing ink. And then for this first piece, I'm coating it with Simon's Detail Clear Embossing Powder. And then I'm going to repeat the process, but then use Simon's Detail Gold Embossing Powder. And then again, after I did this, I was like, ooh, I wonder what this would look like with like that rose gold embossing powder I love. The wheels kept turning. I was like, you could just keep going and going and going and just have a blast with it. But I only did the 2 embossing powders, but now that I've done it, I'm like, oh, I should have pulled out that rose gold embossing powder because that would have looked gorgeous too. And like so many colors, like this would have looked beautiful on navy, on red, like just fun. So I just did the 3 different colors with the 2 different embossing powders, but the sky's the limit. And it doesn't have to be this background stamp, like so many different background stamps would work. I just thought this would be gorgeous heat embossed because there's so much detail to the stamp itself that it would just lend so nicely to the heat embossing. So after I'd got the second one done and coated with the gold embossing powder, I melted it with my heat tool. Technically, I probably could have stamped all the backgrounds at once, coated them all with embossed powder, then melted them all at once. But because I'm doing backgrounds and so many of them, and I've got stuff piled up all over my desk, so I have nowhere to put anything, I just thought it would be safer for me to just do, 2 at a time so that I'm not knocking things over and, removing the embossing powder before it's melted, that sort of a thing. So, as always, the magic of it all melting just makes my day. It looks so gorgeous, especially the clear. I was quite surprised at how much I really liked it. Obviously, I like the metallics and everything, but the clear just, that shine on the dark cardstock. So nice. It would look really nice on lighter cardstock too, like you did a lighter brown, lighter greens, etc. Like, again, sky's the limit. You just got to do it and play with it and see, what you prefer. These would also look really nice, like tone on tone even, or, stamped in darker inks or lighter inks, with no heat embossing at all. Like, my mind just won't stop. I want to keep doing this. I need more hours in the day. So I'm using Simon's Midnight Green cardstock, which is not a color I reach for very often, but for Christmas colors and for a background stamp like this, it was like the perfect shade of green. So again, same thing. Stamping it with the clear embossing ink, coating it with clear embossing powder, and then doing the same with gold embossing powder, and then melting those with my heat tool. All these pieces of cardstock I had just cut to like 6x6 just for convenience sake. Plus, again, it kind of minimizes any oops. Like if I had cut these down already to the size I wanted to use, there's a greater chance that, I would rub off edges with my fingers before I melted them, that sort of thing. So this just kind of gives me that little bit of wiggle room, in case I do mess up, because generally that's what happens. So for my final 2 panels, I'm just using some craft cardstock here, because I have a thing. I love the look of gold embossing powder and craft, but I was also curious to see how it would look with the clear. Like before you melt it, it kind of just fades into the cardstock and doesn't really look like anything. And it's like, oh, this one's going to be a dud. But once you melt it, that really brings out, like, it just kind of deepens and intensifies the stamped image. But the craft would look really nice. I was thinking with like stamped with a dark brown just ink, that would look really nice. So yeah. someone else, hopefully, like, you know, if you get your hands on this stamp, make a ton of backgrounds. Tag me on Instagram, whatever, just so I can see it. So, got the gold one done. Gold on craft, gold on anything, really. Who am I kidding? The gold is gorgeous. Absolutely love it. It picks up all of the detail of this stamp. I just love. And then the clear, same thing. Like, it doesn't really look like anything. And then you melt it, though, and it just, again, picks up all that detail. And technically, you could kind of just keep these simple. Like, I add ink and splatter and all that kind of stuff just because I can't not do those steps. But these are so nice that you honestly could just cut them down, put them on a card front, and be good to go. So I've got all my backgrounds here of the gold embossed ones on the green, the brown, and the craft, and then the clear embossed ones. And then I'm die cutting all of them with Simon's Basic Rectangles wafer dies. And I die cut them first with the largest one. But afterwards, I actually die cut these with the second one down because I want to have the card base kind of matte the edges, just to kind of frame it up a little bit. So after all this die cutting, because I wasn't even paying attention at this point, I was just like in the zone doing my thing and not even realizing that all these like panels were A2 sized. So I'll cut them down later and they'll be good to go. But then I also decided to add a little bit of ink blending. Just because, again, it was more a curiosity thing. I was curious to see how it all would look. So on the craft pieces, I just blended on some vintage photo distress ink, just the regular distress ink, with my little mini ink blending tool because I keep the foams in the bottom of these ink pads. I've been using oxide inks constantly, like for months now. So I don't reach for my distress inks as often, but for things like this, I prefer something like a distress ink or just a dye-based ink. Just to do my blends, and they don't cover up the embossing powder. And any areas that do, it's just easy to wipe away. You could do this with oxide inks. You're just going to get a completely different look because of the way the inks are, the way they sit, etc. But for this, I just wanted to add a little bit of blending on camera, especially in the dark brown. You don't notice it as much. You'll see it more on the panel with the clear embossing, but it does just kind of give it that little extra bit of depth, that little extra bit of dimension. But again, you could totally skip this step. I was just doing it because I really was just genuinely curious how this would look. This also would be where if you did these on much lighter cardstocks, you know, especially with the clear heat embossing, if you stamp them on a really light, like a really pale brown cardstock, and then clear heat embossed it, and then added the ink blending to make the cardstock darker, but then the heat embossing would be lighter, that would look really nice too. This is what I'm talking about. Like, my brain doesn't stop. So many ideas, not enough time. So, on the dark brown cardstock, I had used ground espresso distress ink. And then on the midnight green cardstock, I'm using pine needles distress ink. And just blending it from the edges, just quick and easy, wiping off the excess with my microfiber cloth just to remove any of the ink from the heat embossing. And then splatter. Gotta have the splatter. Can't not have the splatter. I just can't not do it. So I'm using my Perfect Pearl powder that's in my little mini mister bottle with water. So I mix that up really well, and then I just take the nozzle right out and splatter it this way. So I've got a little bit of shimmer going on. And then I'm also adding some Distress Picket Fence paint that I would get my brush wet before kind of mixing with paint, so thinning it out the teeniest little bit, and then splattering that as well. So I just go along and splatter all these backgrounds in my splatter box. I still manage to get like paint splatter all over everything because that's just what I do too. But splattered all these backgrounds, and then these is like literally had these like propped up all over the place, trying not to knock things on top of them while they dry. So once I've got all of my backgrounds splattered, I will set all these aside to dry while I work on the sentiments for all the cards. You could mix and match. I was thinking like die cut sentiments, adding some like die cut pine branches, because there's a Simon die that came out last year, the year before, that was pine branches. Like, again, you could really step these up if you wanted, but I wanted to keep things simple. And rather than like mixing and matching a ton of sentiments, I decided to do the same sentiment for all of them. So I pulled out the little Seasons Greeting sentiment from the new Holiday Greetings Mix 1 stamp set. So I've put the black foam insert back into my MISTI because I'm stamping with clear stamps now. And I'd already trimmed down all the cardstock I'm going to heat emboss the sentiment onto. So I just trim them down into strips slightly larger than the sentiment. And the beauty of this one, it's got like a little like frame around it, so it just kind of gives it that little extra something. So I have all my cardstock here. So I've got 2 pieces of the brown, the midnight green, and the craft. I'm going to cover all of them with my anti-static powder tool. I've lined up the stamp like in the bottom corner of my MISTI, and then this way I can just like stamp and heat emboss over and over again and get all these sentiments done in one step. So I'm stamping all the sentiments, or the sentiment, with the clear embossing ink, and then all of them are going to be heat embossed with that detailed gold embossing powder. And just holding that little strip of cardstock with my little reverse tweezers so I don't end up burning my fingers. But again, just they all now have the anti-static powder on them, so I can just do this over and over again. So this is definitely the type of Christmas card where if you had a ton to, you know, create, a system like this works really, really well. Like I made 6 in one sitting. I had and you could just, you know, switch up the colors. You could keep them all the same if you wanted, but I like switching out the colors. You know, it just adds that little extra something. So, and plus it keeps me from getting too bored, you know, by doing different embossing powders, different colors of cardstock, etc. It just kind of, you know, keeps things interesting, you know. So after all my sentiments were heat embossed, I coated the back of each piece with Simon's Big Mama foam tape. So put that on the back of all those little sentiment strips. And then I had also cut down some of Simon's cream cardstock to be just slightly larger than each of these sentiment pieces, because I'm going to use the cream cardstock as my card base. Just something a little warmer than using stark white. I thought the cream kind of played nicely with like the browns and the greens and the craft, etc. So I put the little backing onto each of the sentiments, and then those sentiments I'm going to adhere to each of the card front panels with Simon's Craft Tacky Glue. And by this point, I've already die cut down those backgrounds to be just smaller than my A2 card front. So you'll see that in a minute when I adhere all these to the actual card base. So I'm going to adhere each of those sentiments to the card fronts with that Craft Tacky Glue, just kind of positioning them too as well to kind of cover up some of the larger splatters. There's a few here and there where I ended up smearing the splatters because, again, my desk is a mess. It happens. So I will fix that though in a minute as well. So all my card bases, like I said, are Simon's cream cardstock cut to 4 1/4, or 5.5 by 8.5 and scored at 4 1/4. So they're all top folding A2 cards. And for the insides of the cards, I am using the Inside Christmas Greetings stamp set. This came out with the Stamp-tember release. Love. So I took one of the sentiments from the set and I am stamping it on the inside of all of these cards with VersaFine Clair Fallen Leaves ink. This is the ink that I was like, ooh, this would look really nice with that background. Like stamped on, well, like cream cardstock, stamped on craft, stamped on brown. It would look gorgeous. Just another idea. So anywho, after I stamped the inside of all the cards, I adhered the card front panels to the card bases with Craft Tacky Glue. So now you can see how it just, that frames the, you know, the card fronts and then the sentiments. It just, that little extra bit kind of gives it that finishing touch. So I went along, adhered all of my card fronts. Once these are all adhered, I'm going to add just a little bit of embellishment. I'm not going overboard. I know, shocker. I'm using Simon's Stay Gold confetti, and I'm only going to add a couple. Again, mostly to kind of cover up some of the little smeary splotches that I'd, you know, inadvertently created that I didn't like the look of. Plus, it gives it that tiny little bit of bling, but I'm not going overboard because we've got like the heat embossing and the splatter and everything. I'm trying to keep these a little bit more simple. So I just adhere, you know, 3 of these little sequins to each of the card fronts with my Craft Tacky Glue, just picking them up with my jewel picker and then pressing them into place. And then once I've got those adhered, these cards are finished. So today's video is part of a blog hop. There is actually 2 days of blog hops. So this is day 1. So there's going to be 2 days of blog hops with Simon Says Stamp and a whole bunch of designers. I'll have links and info in my blog post, which will be the very first link in the description box below the video. I am positive there will be a ton of inspiration with all of these new products. So I highly recommend you check it out. There's giveaways, all kinds of fun stuff. So again, I'll have links to my blog post. I'll have a supply list with links to all the supplies I used, so you can check that out below in the description box if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.